Mummified feline friends. Cats are typically known for their captivating and cute faces, but what archaeologists in 2018 found was far from being cute. While digging through the tombs of ancient Egypt, not only did the team discover the typical mummified pharaohs, but also found their mummified pets. In 2018, a team of archaeologists in Egypt excavated a 4,500-year-old tomb close to Cairo. While it's already established that the pharaohs were buried with their dear ones around, with tombs often including servants, favorite items, and anything else they expected to need in the afterlife, they were taken aback when they found dozens of mummified cats. What was shocking wasn't that the people of that time had chosen to mummify cats, it was the number of cats that was jaw-dropping. Did the ancient Egyptians love their cats so much that they wanted to take several of them along with them to the afterlife? We can now assume that they did. The tomb also held other testimonies to uncover the ancient Egyptian love for felines. The team found 100 gilded statues of cats and also a statue of the ancient cat goddess herself, Bastet. According to the Ministry of Antiquities of Egypt, the tomb belongs to the 5th dynasty of the Great Egyptian Kingdom. It was discovered in Saqqara, which was previously the location of the ancient city of Memphis. There have been tales of cats being worshipped in ancient Egypt, but according to expert Antonietta Catanzariti, who was the curator of Smithsonian Sackler Gallery exhibit Divine Felines, Cats of Ancient Egypt, although they did consider the creatures divine, they weren't really worshipped. Instead, cats were actually studied. Their behavior was examined to create images of gods and goddesses based on them. If you look at other deities of the era, you'll find references to several other animals as well, such as crocodiles, ibises, and cattle. So if the cats weren't worshipped, why were they mummified? It's suspected that like anything else found in the tombs, the mummified cats were meant to accompany their owners into the afterlife. It was actually a fairly common practice, with cats likely being bred specifically for this purpose.
Saber-toothed monster. Something terrifying happened 260 million years ago. For the first time in the history of the planet, a predator, possibly even more terrifying than any of the dinosaurs, was introduced to the world. This predator was called Inostrania. It was a carnivorous monster with huge saber-toothed canines. It lived in what is today Siberia and was significantly more dangerous than any other predator alive at the time. The monster could grow up to 12 feet in length, its skull alone being over 2 feet long. Its teeth were so big that they could easily puncture flesh and pierce skulls. Even stranger is that this monster wasn't how you're probably picturing it. It wasn't like a saber-toothed tiger. Instead, it was kind of a mix between a mammal and a reptile, a kind of creature known as a synapsid. It lived during the Permian period, and its teeth were over 6 inches long. It could run as fast as a lion, and when it caught its prey, it used its teeth to either kill its victims by asphyxiation or simply let it die from blood loss. It was roughly the size of a bear, but with teeth like a T-Rex. Honestly, this is a nightmare creature, and if it were still around today, it would probably be one of the more deadly predators known to man. Although, knowing humans, we probably would have hunted it down to near extinction if it were still around, and locked the rest in zoos. The Siberian unicorn. It's true, unicorns did exist, and they lived at the same time as modern humans. They didn't necessarily look the way you might think they do, but have a modern cousin that you might have seen at your local zoo. An ancient rhino species named Elasmosaurus sibericum was just one of 250 rhino species during prehistoric times. It weighed up to 3.5 tons, over 7,700 pounds, about the size of a mammoth, and once lived in the open grasslands of what is now Kazakhstan. These so-called Siberian unicorns, who got their name for the single horn they once had, were around at the same time as modern humans and Neanderthals. Even though experts have never found one of their famed horns, Elasmotherium sibericum had a single horn that protruded from its skull, the largest horn of any rhinoceros species. Just like the mammoth, they also had long, shaggy hair and died exclusively on tough, dry grasses. It's believed this particular diet could have been the reason behind their downfall, until a new study was done on a skull found in Kazakhstan. Experts thought Elasmotherium sibericum died out between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago. But new research showed they were around much longer, as close as 39,000 years ago, which would have had them roaming the plains at the same time Neanderthals were hunting and gathering. But that doesn't mean the Siberian unicorn was food for modern humans. As researchers studied the teeth of these massive animals, they found isotopes that helped them pinpoint the animal's downfall. Because they relied exclusively upon the grasslands for their survival, they didn't stand a chance when the world's ice sheets spread, covering their feeding habitat. Unlike other species like the woolly rhino, who ate different varieties of food, the Siberian unicorn eventually went extinct. Even though they were the last surviving member of the Elastotherium genus, they lasted much longer than scientists first thought. The Akmonistion shark. Before dinosaurs, there were sharks. Oddly enough, after the dinosaurs, there were also sharks. Sharks have been a constant predator in the world's oceans for millions of years. One of the earliest and most terrifying of the sharks was a beast called Akmonistion. It lived from between the late Devonian period to the early Carboniferous period. The most unique thing about this prehistoric shark is that it had a crest on the top of its head that kind of looked like an anvil. Sharks today have a single fin sticking out of their back, but this one instead had an anvil jutting out from the top of its head. It also had a collection of spines, kind of like tiny porcupine quills on its head, in front of the anvil. What exactly the spines were used for, or even the anvil crest for that matter, is a total mystery. It seems like it would have been defensive in nature, as a sort of helmet to protect itself against predators, but scientists have no confirmation of that theory. Even though this shark is pretty freaky, it probably wasn't that dangerous by modern standards. The beast only grew to be about 3 feet in length, basically nothing more than a baby when put beside the megalodon, which could grow to be around 60 feet long, or even the modern great white, only about 20 feet long. Caelestiventus hanseni. How did an extremely rare flying dinosaur end up in the deserts of prehistoric Utah? That's the question archaeologists had to answer when the remains of Caelestiventus hanseni were found near Dinosaur National Monument. The animal was located in the Saints and Sinner Quarry, a truly rare find, considering how all the other Triassic pterosaurs have only been found in the Italian, Austrian, and Swiss Alps. With a wingspan of over 5 feet, Caelestiventus hanseni was quite large when compared to other flying reptiles that soared on skin-covered wings. The largest animal ever to fly, they thrived from the late Triassic epoch, which started around 215 million years ago and lasted until the end of the Cretaceous period, around 66 billion years ago. When researchers found the bones, they were excited that they had stumbled across the only desert-dwelling non-pterodactyloid pterosaur, one that predated other desert pterosaurs by more than 65 million years. Lucky for them, the bones had settled in an area rich in sandstone, which meant they were in good shape to study. But when it came time to excavate, archaeologists decided that taking CT scans and creating 3D models of the bones would be a better option to keep their remains intact and preserved. Instead of finding just a single bone, they had the sides of the face and roof of the skull, along with the brain case, the lower jaws, and part of the animal's massive wing. When they finally got a closer look, they found that the Caelestiventus hanseni specimen had a whopping 112 teeth. That's some bite. They could also tell by impressions of the brain on the skull roof that even though the animal didn't have a great sense of smell, they would have had great eyesight, all the better to hunt with. But the revelations didn't stop there. After determining that Caelestiventus hanseni was related to a dinosaur known as Dimetrodon, researchers realized not all members of the Dimetrodontidae family of dinosaurs had died out during the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction event. Somehow, Caelestiventus hanseni had survived long enough to make its way to modern-day Utah, where it remained for centuries before archaeologists made their unexpected discovery. Scutosaurus. The Scutosaurus was a very strange reptile that came before the dinosaurs. It has been described as an armored reptile that probably grew to be roughly 10 feet long and weighed a ton. This creepy reptile monster lived sometime around 252 million years ago in what is today Russia, in the evolutionary melting pot that was the Permian era. Interestingly enough, these creatures are in no way related to dinosaurs, but were actually very early ancestors of our modern turtles. Picture this. The Scutosaurus was a giant turtle with no shell that traveled in large herds for safety. Instead of having a hard outer shell to keep away predators, the Scutosaurus had bony plates all over its back. Now, remember the terrifying saber-tooth monster we talked about earlier? That was actually the main predator of the Scutosaurus. They lived in Russia at the same time, and although this was basically a huge, very ugly turtle with armor plating, it was still no match for the carnivore. The reptile couldn't even chew its own food, and instead gobbled food along with the rocks helping to grind vegetation inside its stomach, making it easier for the digestive juices to work. I guess the predators of the era thought it was pre-chewing all their food for them, and had no problem trying to turn them into giant turtle soup. Therizinosaurus. What made archaeologists believe that the remains of a 70-million-year-old dinosaur belonged to an unknown giant turtle when researchers first found skeletal fragments of the Therizinosaurus in 1940 Mongolia? The enormous curved claws looked very much like those sported by ancient sea turtles. It wasn't until 25 years of further research that the fragments were identified as part of a group of theropod dinosaurs known as the Therizinosaurs, which means turtle-like. The animal would have been about 36 feet long, weighing over 3 tons, with forelimbs that measured up to 10 feet long. Their terrifying curved claws alone measured almost 3 feet long, but it would take comparisons to a related dinosaur to determine the origin of Therizinosaurus. Even though theropods were mostly carnivores who ate meat, the shape of the skull and structure of the jaws and teeth suggest that they mostly ate vegetation, using the long neck and flexible forelimbs to scavenge for food. After discovering Segnosaurus and Erlikosaurus in Asia and comparing them to Therizinosaurus, researchers realized they would have been able to disembowel a raptor or even a tyrannosaur. They were the longest claws of any dinosaur identified up until its discovery, and the longest claws of any animal in the history of life on Earth. Shockingly though, they didn't use these claws to hunt other dinosaurs. They were vegetarians who used these killer claws to gather dangling leaves and ferns instead. Not quite the deadly image we thought, as the largest identified theropod weighing only a few tons less than Tyrannosaurus rex. Therizinosaurus may have looked terrifying, but these plant eaters may have only used their enormous claws to intimidate so they could survive life 70 million years ago. Which of these prehistoric creatures do you think is the strangest? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Giant sea scorpion. The giant sea scorpion is exactly what it sounds like. It was a giant scorpion that lived in the sea about 467 million years ago. It was actually identified recently as the oldest eurypterid in the world. Eurypterids are a group of arthropods that lived in the water, ancient ancestors to the spiders, ticks, and lobsters that still live on the planet. But this thing was way larger than a tick. It was about the size of a person, and it wasn't actually a scorpion. It was more like a lobster mixed with a spider that could stand almost 6 feet tall while scuttling across the floor of the ocean. It would make the scorpions of today look absolutely puny in comparison. The fossil of this terrifying creature was discovered in a meteorite crater in northeastern Iowa. According to James Lamsdell, one of the leads on the excavation, the giant sea scorpion was one of the most important predators of its day in the early Paleozoic ecosystem. It was remarkably preserved thanks to the waters at the bottom of the meteorite crater, which sat undisturbed for millions of years and had almost no oxygen in them. There may have been other creatures like this. Scientists just haven't found them yet. Giant trilobite. Scientists recently discovered a giant species of trilobite that once lived in the waters off the coast of Australia about 500 million years ago. The trilobite measured roughly 2.5 feet in length, or the size of a person's forearm. It was a nightmare creature that would have towered over the modern crustaceans that live in southern Australia. scientists also found evidence that the monster may have been a cannibal, feasting on its very own kind. But just what is a trilobite? It's a creature related to modern crustaceans like lobsters, crabs, and some insects. Trilobites are also some of the oldest creatures that have ever been found by scientists. Thousands and thousands of trilobite specimens have been found, helping scientists to understand what is known as the Cambrian explosion, or the sudden appearance of life on Earth about 540 million years ago. This was a time when all the major animal groups came into being, but most of the trilobites found have been tiny, just a couple of inches or even smaller. This particular trilobite was a giant, and scientists named it Rex after the Tyrannosaurus rex, because rex means king in Latin. And of course, this trilobite was king of its kind. It's the biggest of over 20,000 described species. If you stepped on one of these while walking on the beach, suffice it to say, you'd be in for the shock of your life. The flying protosaur, a primitive group of reptiles related to archosaurs known as Sharovipteryx, went extinct during the Triassic period. With no direct descendants today, it's difficult to determine where the Sharovipteryx could have gotten its strange features. These gliding dinosaurs have back legs that are extremely long and connect to the tail and torso with a gliding membrane, similar to the wings of bats. But unlike bats, this membrane stretches from their hind limbs instead of their forelimbs, allowing Sharovipteryx to glide using its back legs. There has only ever been one specimen of the dinosaur found in Asia, but surprisingly, it wasn't the only dinosaur with a strange method of flying. Another small reptile, known as the Longisquama, was a type of gliding reptile that had long external extensions of ribs that were connected by membranes, very much like the gliding membrane of Sharovipteryx that went extinct after the Triassic period. There was a type of Pterosauropomorpha that lived in the early Triassic period, about 245 million years ago. Some believe they may have been related to pterosaurs, though pterosaurs didn't have the same membrane along their back legs. The lizard-like animal was discovered in 1971 by archaeologists, but with only one specimen. Researchers had to be extra careful when trying to get a closer look. When they did, they found some interesting details in the fossil, showing that Sharovipteryx had wide five-toed feet and long legs in proportion to the body. Skin impressions in the fossil show that they were covered in overlapping lizard-like scales on their body, but their wings didn't have scales. They were a small dinosaur though, stretching only about 8 inches long, with an extremely long tail, and weighing no more than 7.5 grams. Astonishingly, there were no other hind leg-based gliders around after the Sharovipteryx went extinct. Some archaeologists believe they may have used their shorter and thinner front limbs to steer while gliding through the air. Researchers believe that the ancestors of the animal started out as climbers with enormously long back legs that splayed out from side to side. This is why they think their unique wing configuration would have helped them glide easier. Sadly though, they never made it past the Triassic period for us to learn more. Longisquama. How are dinosaurs with only one fossil in the record so easy to distinguish? One dinosaur known as Longisquama, which means long scales, lived in the woodlands of Central Asia during the Middle Triassic period, about 230 to 225 million years ago. They were about 6 inches long and weighed only a few ounces, and were known to dine on insects. But the most distinguishing characteristic of this dinosaur is the fact that they were so small and had feather-like plumes on their back, a close relative to other small gliding reptiles from the Triassic period. Longisquama had structures that extended along their back, giving them a bit of lift when they jumped from branch to branch. There is still some debate over whether Longisquama was an ancestor to birds, which might explain their quills as something similar to feathers. But unfortunately, there has only ever been one fossil of Longisquama ever discovered. So until more fossil evidence is located, Longisquama will continue to be that strange reptile with feather-like plumes on their backs, even though some paleontologists originally believed that these so-called feathers were actually exotic plant fronds that were buried when the dinosaur died. The fact that they were so close to the fossilized spine means they were probably anchored deep within the skin and attached to the body. They also had a central filament that ran along the length, which leads experts to believe that they were constructed using the same genes that later produced feathers, even though one skeleton record is too incomplete to find out its exact position in the evolutionary map. Archaeologists think Longisquama was probably a pre-ancestor to pterosaurs, crocodiles, and birds. Elasmosaurus. a sea monster discovered in Antarctica has proved to be the heaviest of its kind ever found. This beast is known as an Elasmosaurus and weighed a whopping 15 tons. Even more amazing is the fact that it took several decades for scientists to finally unearth the bones of this prehistoric monster on a small island off the coast of Antarctica. This aquatic reptile swam alongside dinosaurs, but it wasn't actually a dinosaur. It evolved out of something that came way before dinosaurs ever existed: terrestrial reptiles. Somewhere along the line, reptiles evolved back into the ocean, grew 2 pairs of flippers, and learned how to use locomotion to propel themselves through the water. That's right. Evolution works both ways. It led some animals back into the water after becoming landlubbers. So far, plesiosaurs, which is the family the huge elasmosaurs belong to, are the only animals scientists know of that use this kind of motion to swim. What did the huge Elasmosaurus look like? It was kind of like a manatee mixed with a giraffe. It looked awkward, to put it bluntly, but it looked delicious to plenty of massive predators in those ancient oceans. It was a strange reptile that could grow to be nearly 40 feet long, but that's on the extreme side, with most Elasmosaurus only growing up to 5 tons, or just a third of this monumental monster from Antarctica. Carnotaurus sastri, a dinosaur discovered in Patagonia, has given archaeologists a jaw-dropping look at its fossilized remains, the well-preserved skin of a certain carnivorous dinosaur known as Carnotaurus sastri shows scientists a complex coat of scales, bumps, wrinkles, and more. The species is a type of horned abelosaurid called the Carnotaurus sastri, and when it was discovered in 1984, it was the first meat-eating dinosaur that was ever found with fossilized skin impressions that covered it from neck to tail. The different ridges and bumps on the animal resemble Australia's thorny devil, but in other places, the skin is a lot like the rough texture of elephant hide. After analyzing the discovery in close detail, archaeologists found the dinosaur scales were arranged in regular rows and were all about the same size. But strangely, large and randomly distributed studs were surrounded by some elongated, diamond-shaped scales that were scattered randomly across the dinosaur's body. Luckily, the remains of Carnotaurus sastri had the most well-preserved skin of any sauropod ever found, with 6 fragments of skin taken from the neck, the shoulder, the thorax, and the tail, even though some of the smaller patches only measure about 20 mm in diameter. Archaeologists were able to find tiny flakes of skin among larger scales that are similar to those found on tyrannosaurids. Still, that doesn't mean scientists know exactly why they had such a wide range of large and small scales, whether they were a type of body armor for protection, a way to regulate the body temperature, similar to African elephants, or just a way to display coloration on the animal. It's clear that the Carnotaurus sastri was unique in its own way. Arthropleura. The Arthropleura is an extinct giant invertebrate that looked kind of like a millipede, but could grow to nearly 2 feet wide and up to 6 feet long, though some scientists say they could have grown even larger. Imagine a millipede bigger than you, scurrying across your front lawn. This is what an Arthropleura was, and yeah, it was pretty terrifying. According to National Geographic, the Arthropleura was the largest bug that had ever lived on land, and it did so during the Permian era between 320 and 290 million years ago. Its remains were found in Pennsylvania, but it was a different climate than the one of today. This was a time when North America and Europe were much closer to the equator, and so they were covered in lush swamps and vegetation. All that vegetation, along with the animals of the time that died and fell to the ground without being eaten, then decomposed under pressure from rocks, turned into petroleum, and they are what you're using today to heat your house and drive your car, as weird as that sounds. The giant bug had a body composed of 30 jointed segments, with each segment covered by plates. These plates fell off when it died, which is why not a single complete fossil of an Arthropleura has ever been found. What's the biggest insect you've ever seen? Probably wasn't 6 feet long, but it may have been pretty massive. Tell us about it in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Arambourgiania. In the 1940s, near a railway station in Jordan, a strange fossil discovered by a mine detector would end up becoming an important part of history. Discovered in Upper Cretaceous rocks that were weathering due to the elements, the 24-inch long bone was skinny, cylindrical, and very thin. Years later, it was determined to be part of the wing finger of a giant pterosaur, which was later named Arambourgiania. But did researchers get it wrong? Did they identify the wrong bone? It turns out that after additional research, the bone was identified as part of the vertebra and not a bone from the hand. By comparing it to other specimens, it was determined to be one of the largest as darkids. Stunningly, the animal is thought to have had a wingspan that stretched at least 7 meters, with its body measuring about 13 meters long. Other similar species were found in Cretaceous rocks around the world, showing they hunted prey on the ground, dining on amphibians, lizards, and small dinosaurs. This made Arambourgiania a large predatory creature, similar to modern-day large predatory birds like storks and shoebills that hunted in a similar way. But could it really be possible that this winged dinosaur was bigger than the Tyrannosaurus rex? Arambourgiania lived 65 million years ago as part of a group of reptiles that included pterodactyls. They had an unusually long neck and were close to the size of a small plane. More than twice the length of other gigantosaurs, the animal's neck would have been massive, but not very flexible, making it difficult for them to look around while they were hunting for prey, even though experts think they wouldn't have constantly flapped their wings while flying because it would have taken too much energy. Arambourgiania would have been able to soar for long periods of time and fly far when looking for food. With pterosaur fossils discovered from Eastern Europe to North America and into the Middle East and Asia, it's quite possible that Arambourgiania would have had a global range, allowing them to travel further than experts ever imagined, making it quite possible that more fossils of this strange creature will be found for further study. Giant Cambrian shrimp. A gigantic monster from the Cambrian era was recently unearthed in Greenland. This creature is believed to have been the first filter feeder ever to troll the seas. It had bristly appendages all over its body just like a shrimp, which it used to feed off the smaller critters blooming in the newly developed ecosystems of the seas, smaller organisms similar to krill. The shrimp-like monster has been named Tamesiocaris borealis, and it lived during the Cambrian explosion from about 540 to 493 million years ago. According to Jacob Winther, a paleontologist from the University of Bristol, it probably evolved from one of the top predators of the time to become the biggest and baddest filter feeder anywhere in the world. It lived in the Arctic Ocean specifically, but this was at a time when the Arctic was a tropical ocean south of the equator, as crazy as that sounds. It may not sound daunting, but this huge shrimp monster was 2.7 feet long. This in itself isn't that gigantic, but the fact that it looked like an alien with eyes on the end of stalks, a mouth that looked like a piece of pineapple, and long bristly arms, it would have definitely been a scary thing to witness. Dimetrodon. The Dimetrodon was a mammalian synapsid that lived about 290 million years before today. In simple terms, it was a giant lizard that went extinct 40 million years before the first dinosaurs showed up. It had a giant spine sail on its back, made from spine bones extending out of its vertebrae, giving it a menacing appearance in life and a freakish appearance as a skeleton. It walked on 4 legs, had a massive skull and jaws full of teeth, and archaeologists have primarily found its skeletons in the southwestern United States. What did this huge reptile monster do? Well, it's not quite a reptile to be technical. A lot of people mistake it for a lizard or dinosaur, but that's not the case. Even though it looked like a reptile and kinda resembled a giant lizard, it was actually more closely related to mammals, though it wasn't actually a mammal either. As you can tell, the classification of animals before the dinosaurs is a bit difficult. All scientists really know is that the Dimetrodon was definitely an apex predator that fed on fish and tetrapods, including actual reptiles and easy-to-catch amphibians. As for that giant spine on its back, scientists believe it was probably used for thermal regulation or to keep its body temperature at the proper level. Giant dragonfly. Before the dinosaurs ever walked the earth, there was a giant dragonfly that would make you pee your pants if you ever saw it. It's called the Meganuera, and it went extinct about 300 million years ago in the late Carboniferous period. It looked like just a normal dragonfly, except that its wings extended to over 2 feet long. The dragonfly was so big, it could have picked up your cat and flown away with it, assuming your cat was pretty small. And it would have done it too, seeing as it was a predatory monster. It's also the largest flying insect known to scientists and one of the earliest relatives of modern dragonflies. Fossils of this incredible insect were first discovered in 1880 by French coal miners, then described properly in 1885 by the French paleontologist Charles Brongniart. There have not been many specimens found, so experts don't have a full understanding of the Meganwera's biology, but they do say it probably had huge eyes that were way larger than its body, giving a whole new definition to the term bug-eyed. Thanks for watching. How would you feel about living with giant dragonflies? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to hit the subscribe button for more awesome videos like these. See you next time. Bye!